With Fanatics Fest, we ended up learning a bunch about Modern Warfare 4. Even though the highlight of that event was more about kill block, there was tons of stuff that happened after that. Stuff with COD Next, the beta, and even more interesting stuff because they had panels where people were able to ask questions to the devs, and tons of information came out of that. And especially from Infinity Ward, the way they handled the 3 months leading up to MW2 and probably that whole year after versus now, it's a big difference. And it's kind of one of those things where it's kind of like an encouraging sign that we got a little bit of inklings with these new studio devs, kind of following through on the things they've already said early on. So we're going through all of that, the beta schedule, kill block, kind of what people found out about that because it is a gunfight type of thing. And then also some of the takeaways from the dev interviews. COD Next is officially going to happen on August 21st. It's not going to be an in-person event. It should be all online. So whereas before it was like around 200 creators from all over the world in one location, it should be more than 200 creators and anyone will be able to get access to it that they have selected. So maybe 300-400 creators. So maybe some of your favorites that didn't get in normally to COD Next, they'll be able to get part of that. And then I'll likely be part of that as well. And I'll be live streaming on that day, probably a little early, get going, and then we'll jump into the beta immediately after, which for COD Next, for just kind of reference, it's usually 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, usually runs for about 3 or 4 hours. So that'll go to about 2. And then that means the beta will probably kick off somewhere around 2:30, 3 o'clock. They'll kick on the servers. They'll give it people a chance to download. You'll have beta codes for watching, probably tons of beta codes to give away. And then if you pre-order the game and stuff like that, you'll get access immediately from the 21st to the 25th. That'll be that first closed early access. And then we get the open part 3 days later from the 28th to the 1st. Also, Nintendo Switch will be joining the beta, I believe, as well. So that'll be kind of interesting for the Switch 2. I don't know how the Switch 2 can run the game, but not old gen. Because Switch 2 is kind of like old gen hardware, even though it's like more modern. So with that kind of combination, there's usually like that day difference, but now it's going to be immediately. There's like no downtime. And since we'll be at home, people will be able to make content right away. You won't have to really worry about embargoes because everyone will have access to the content pretty much immediately. And I think this time around, Infinity Wards is pretty confident about what they're putting out. They've had so many hands in there kind of getting feedback and getting information, which we saw with the Fanatics Fest. So that's where we'll get into the hands-on part of it. So for people that are unfamiliar with this was the first public hands-on event. There was creators, fans, celebrities. It was 10v10, which was showcased. And that's what you're kind of seeing in the gameplay from the different creators that were able to attend that in New York when I was in Vegas at COD Champs, which completely different areas. No way you could do both. And then the overall impressions, I think, for the people that went, that played, the overall sentiment was pretty positive. There were a couple negatives that came out of that, which we'll talk a little bit about. But basically, the map has altering pieces, which we covered. You get up to 500 plus combinations, modular slabs. You got the center, the two end pieces, the classic maps that are fan favorites that can be thrown in there. And it doesn't have to be the full map. Like we saw with Crash, it was only a portion of it where the helicopter is and not the end pieces, which kind of suck. Which would make every match feel different. Personally, I'm not a fan of gunfight like that where I'm going to play it a bunch, maybe for some rewards in a tournament, maybe a little bit of fun with it, with friends or something like that. But outside of that, I would much rather play hardpoint or dom, which I get is pretty tricky because then you have to figure out spawns. So pretty cool. It's something like creative that they're able to do, and they're a little bit ambitious to do it. But like I said, since it's in the gunfight pool, maybe that'll be great for that type of mode, that people like that mode, and I'm glad that the mode's returning, which I think it'll still be 3v3, which before was 2v2 since the map's slightly bigger. And then you got the 10v10, which is probably pretty hectic. And there were a few different like things that were negative that we'll talk about, as well as positives. But we'll talk about that when that brings us to the interview, because I think it kind of overlaps with some of those things. With the main thing that they really wanted to emphasize when I got to talk to them in person when I went to the Xbox showcase was that they wanted to like remove player friction. That's kind of the main thing that they wanted to do. And one thing that ended up happening in multiplayer in MW2 is felt like it was more about realism than actually trying to accomplish something that was fun. And sometimes the realism although it can be cool and immersive, it adds too much friction to the player. So they wanted to improve mantling, which we've seen, better ledge movement, more movement freedom, faster transitions, more responsive controls. You can cancel most, if not all, the animations to kind of make things a little bit more fluid and feel like you have player autonomy. And this is drastically different than what we got in MW2, where you were like animation locked to a slide. So if you went for a slide, you couldn't hip fire, you couldn't ADS like we can now, you couldn't cancel the slide, you were committed to the slide. And this was so bad that it was pretty memeable, and I've made a few different like posts laughing about how laughably bad this was. And that's just one targeted thing, but MW2 was littered with removal of player autonomy, and that's what I think makes it one of my least favorite CODs, if not the least favorite COD that we've ever had. So it sounded like their philosophy was, instead of forcing players through lengthy animations, Infinity Ward says they're trying to make movement respond to player intention. If you want to shoot, climb, cancel a movement, or change your mind, the game should get out of your way rather than forcing you to finish an animation first, which again is a completely different direction. And whether or not that's going to be positively received right out the gate, like the design decisions they've made, what makes the most sense is that they will actually take in the feedback. That's the difference in the philosophy. Versus before, it was like, well, we've designed it the way we've designed it, and we think that that's best. We don't care if you like it or not, or if it's healthy or not for the game. This one, at least, it feels as though basically what they're saying is that if it doesn't land as clean as they would like, they're open to tweaking it to make it so it lands the way that they would like and that the players want. And that goes into the other part of it, which is fun over realism, which directly contradicts this. They're concerned about, dialing in and making things get the right way. So like I said, instead of just them being the way they are, they're going to actually be able to dial it in for visual recoil, weapon sway, muzzle smoke, visibility just in general, which they've already done a bunch of systems in place of that. And even from the feedback in the gunfight matches that we saw with the kill box, they're going to be able to already incorporate some of those things so that when we get to play it for COD Next, as well as the betas, you'll be able to see that all for yourself with your own settings. And one of the unfortunate parts about these streams is when I played it and had hands on, playing in 4K, game looks beautiful, clear, like about as good as any COD we've ever had. And I think even probably the best looking COD on my screen. But when you go to these streams, the compression is terrible. They're not streaming from their normal setup. The bit rate is probably trash for an event compared to what your home bit rate would be, where it's super sharp, clear recordings that they have that we upload to YouTube that has higher quality. The other part that they touched on is that every feature needs a purpose. It's not just do something for the sake of doing something. And I think with Kill Block, it allows that gunfight mode to kind of live autonomously, where they don't really have to do much to it. They can change single pieces here and there. And even if they don't, there's 500 different variations that you can get. So it's going to be pretty random. So that's kind of solves people kind of over figuring it out. This is the meta on how you play this map in a gunfight map. The repetitive stale likeness that happens from doing the same map over and over. If you were doing Speedball or one of the other gunfight style maps, you have that. And things like the riot shield. They wanted it still to be usable, but the turtling where people just equip it, it's on their back, blocks all that gunfire. It wasn't healthy for the game. We know that it wasn't healthy in MW 2019. You couldn't shoot somebody of the back if they're running around. You kind of had to shoot the ankles or get a weird angle, and it's just obnoxious. It's just obnoxious. It's not good gameplay, and it's still in that game available. People have access to it, and it creates frustration in a way that's just not good. And what they did is they made it so that it's limited use. It's a field upgrade. It can break. So that it's just not people using it passively. It's kind of like a back shield. That's not a good thing to have. They kind of rethought how they want to solve certain problems and actually just address that. They also talk about how different elements influenced MW4 from the other studios. They took a lot of learnings from how MW3 was received, some of the things they did, because that was made by Sledgehammer. And they're paying attention to the other studios, other FPS games, how different things are going to be working together and be cohesive within their own game while still fitting into their vision. And after basically everything this week, of course, the beta's cool announcement. We get to know that that's when that's happening. Kill block, that's all good. But it really comes down to Infinity Ward feels like they're making the changes the right way. They're explaining why they're open to doing those changes. They want to reduce player friction, give players more control, prioritize fun over the realism aspect, and then make every new system solve a gameplay problem like that we saw with the Riot Shield. And it's one thing to just talk about these things, but we really won't know until it's implemented, right? I don't think they've done enough to earn enough goodwill. How those, that like 15 months surrounding MW2 was treated by that studio was not good. They did have a changing of the guard. We got new studio heads, and it seems like things are on the up and up, and they have the clarity to admit that they were wrong, which I never thought I'd see. At least they own up to the issues versus IW for the longest was like, nope, what we say goes, and we're not changing anything, and you, the player, are wrong. I'm interested to see what we get revealed at COD Next. Could be just multiplayer, could be more kill block, could be DMZ. Maybe we get a sneak peek if there's going to be the new Warzone, right? So we'll kind of see what happens. I'm sure there's going to be a ton of MW4 stuff coming out. What they're going to talk about, Ricochet, is still the unknown, but we'll kind of see where we get from there. See you guys in the next one. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.